Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Sandi Schwartz. Sandi, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I am so excited you're here, and I would love for you to start with, how did you get into writing?
How did I get into writing? Well, it really started, I got into communications during my career. I thought I was going to be an environmental lawyer, and I took a few twists and turns right out of college and ended up starting at the Environmental Protection Agency. So environmental studies was my background in policy. And then I kind of, instead of doing the science route, I did more of the science communications route. And I worked at the National Academy of Sciences. I worked on marketing, EPA programs, on energy efficiency. And I really learned how to boil down science into like bullet points so that the public could understand it. So that was how I ended up in the communications field and writing. And then after I had my son, which was a whole interesting situation that involved infertility and preterm labor and postpartum anxiety, and it was a crazy time. I decided to start writing a blog. So I then entered the world of personal writing through the blogging world, and that morphed into freelance writing, and then eventually to wanting to be an author.
I think that's really fascinating. What I really like about what you said with your background was the thing that I take away from that. The biggest theme is being able to distill complex pieces and synthesize them into actionable, relatable things, like taking out what might be unrelated, but helping to see how they go together, but also making something that might seem very difficult to understand, easy to understand, and easy to do something then, because you can understand. So that is really such an amazing transferable skill. That is awesome. And I know that shows up in this whole business space, because, I mean, you have to be able to do something like that to be able to write for multiple audiences, as I know you do. So would you talk a little bit more about what it was like to really explore your personal creative writing? Because that's what the blog was enabling you to do, was find the voice that you wanted to really use here, because writing in the corporate space is a different style of writing. It's an important style of writing, but it's a different style of writing than creative writing or personal writing even.
Yes, well, it's a little bit funny how I like to describe how I started. My first blog was basically me as the anxious mother asking questions about scary things going on. And then I would do the science research behind it. So things like, I read the news about toxins in the baby formula, or, protecting your child from the sun. All these very anxiety-provoking questions, okay? So I did that for a little while. And I like to explain that this was not actually good for me, because it was only stirring up my anxieties.
Yeah.
And so I eventually shifted gears so I went from the savvy science mom to happy science mom. And it's a play on words, because it was all about, I was exploring the science behind happiness and positive psychology. And so it became a more positive approach to how to handle parenthood. And so, this writing and blogging gave me the outlet to explore my own anxieties at first, and then how to address them personally. And so that was really beneficial to me. And then I decided it was helpful to share it with the world.
Oh, I love that. I really love that, because another piece that comes from that is when you're vulnerable, when you're showing up and you're vulnerable and you're showing what's going on and how you're working through it, though, other people can see themselves and they say, you get me, I'm not alone. And therefore they feel seen, and they feel understood. And then they're like, give me some more. I need that again. So what I love that you did, though, is that you were writing this and connecting with other parents, with this at first, but you also were able to find a way to reach children, and writing for two different audiences. I personally, I do that too. I've done that as well with my own books, but I understand that that's there's different things you're thinking about in doing so. Would you talk about that?
Yes. So this whole exploration of positive psychology led me, it also brought me back to my roots and interest in the environment and nature. So that's when I entered this, goal of writing a nonfiction how-to parenting book on how nature can help children feel happier and calmer. And that was easy for me because, again, I was kind of trained on writing bullet lists and doing the research. And I absolutely love the research. I mean, a lot of people are like, how did you do that? And, isn't that boring? I loved doing research. I mean, this is years and years of research that had gone into blog posts and freelance articles, and then compiled, into the book, plus additional research and interviews. But I also said, this is a topic that impacts the children. And so the best thing possible would be to have an accompanying children's book that could go along with it. That way, the parents are learning, and they can use the children's book as a tool to also talk to their children about their emotional well-being, and then how nature can help them. So that was my vision and why I wanted that to come together.
I love that. So would you talk a bit more about how you went about that so that you were the book intended for the parent is focused for them, yet the book for the child is relatable to the child, but still adding value to the parent, because the parent is also the consumer. They're the person who's buying both of these books, but the client in both cases, they're different clients. One client is the parent and one client is the child. So would you talk a bit about writing for the two different audiences in particular?
Yes. So the way I handled the children's book is I did realize I had never written a children's book before, and I needed to seek out guidance. And not being a teacher or I have kids, but I wasn't as confident writing the children's book as I was the nonfiction book. So I collaborated with a friend who's a teacher, who's worked a lot in social emotional learning. And so I, spoke with her about my vision. And then she kind of put the draft together, and then we worked together on the edits. And then I kind of, did a lot of the illustration direction and the, getting it out into the world, the publishing part. I got to put on a publishing hat, which was really exciting. So I needed, that help to understand, how kind of to the ignition of like how to write a children's book. And now that I've been involved in it, I feel a little bit, excited to try again.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, because when you have, when you feel excited about something you've created and it was enjoyable, and then you can't wait to talk about it, then it also feels like, oh, I think I'd like to do that again. I think that would be fun. So I love that you're excited about it. So maybe something else, but you mentioned something now that has piqued my curiosity, that you were excited about the publishing aspects of it, the publishing path. And not all writers get enthusiastic. They want the end result about the publishing because they want the finished book, and that's totally understandable. But sometimes getting it from manuscript form to book form in some way that can be consumed and purchased by someone else, that is not so clear. And sometimes it can feel pretty daunting. Would you talk a bit about that? And also talk about how you got excited, because that would be something that somebody else might go, I'll try those tips too.
Well, I would say this has been a great journey because I've been able to go from learning the whole pitching, proposal pitching and query letter writing, to finding a book, to writing a book, to the illustrations. I mean, that was a whole new ballgame, to directing an illustrator and finding an illustrator. And then, I'm learning all about KDP and Spark. I would say the best resource that even inspired me to be able to have the confidence to do any of this was the Women in Publishing Summit with Alexa Bidgorf, because I took her WIP school like 2 years ago, and I learned all the pieces. The other part that I actually am doing constantly now is marketing. And I know a lot of authors can't stand marketing, but I think it goes back to my time in the consulting world where I was doing, this outreach for the Environmental Protection Agency, and, it's communications and marketing. So I'm able to put all of those skills to good use now as well, including I work on a press release soon. really comes full circle.
I love that. So here's what I'm hearing out of this. One is that you're leveraging your background, you're leveraging a passion,
Mhm.
and those things really are still showing up in this new way of doing business. One way of doing business was through the corporate space, but another way of doing business as an author and consultant in that space. And I love that you are showing how things morph and how the passion that you have, when you're following that, it still comes through in different pieces. And the other piece I heard was that you really like learning, and you're willing to go and learn different parts, taking something complex, something you might not know, and distilling it and being able to figure out what to do next. So I feel like those skills really help to kind of flesh out the publishing space and thus the marketing space pretty well. And I love that you mentioned Women in Publish Summit, the Women in Publishing Summit, because Alexa is just a rock star. She's amazing. And I love what she and her team pull together with that. So yeah, fabulous, fabulous team, fabulous group. And an awesome host, if I may say so too. So she's awesome. But with the publishing path, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because I know one of the spaces that you talked about was that you were traditionally published, but not necessarily through an agent. So would you talk a little bit about how that actually worked?
Yes. So I think this is kind of a neat journey as well, because I really started at the top. I started pitching agents, but I also kind of stayed realistic throughout. I hear stories from a lot of authors that, it's like all or nothing. Like either I get the giant, agent and deal with, Penguin, or I'm not going to write a book. And I just was like, I'm going to keep my options open. So I spent a long time writing the book proposal. And I did attend also a really great part of the journey was writing, the Writing Digest conference in New York. And I was able to present my pitch directly in person, standing there in New York City, to real agents, which was such a learning experience. I was a nervous wreck, but I was so proud when I had finished that. It didn't lead to anything, with those particular agents, but I had taken a quick little course with another expert, how to hone in on my pitch. And it just like really opened my eyes to have that ability. So I started pitching agents, and I learned pretty quickly that they were looking for a very big platform for a nonfiction author. And, I said, hey, I've been blogging for 6 years. I've done everything I can. You just have to be realistic about what your current situation is. And then I used a wonderful book, Jeff Herman's Guide to Agents and Publishing, all that. And I went through there and I started pitching publishers that were allowing unsolicited pitches. And that's where I, was led to my current publisher, Linden Publishing, Quill Driver Books. And they're a small independent publisher, but they've been around for 40 years. So I felt pretty confident in working with them. And then that was actually, I landed that deal June of 2020, pandemic book deal. And then the funny part was, because a lot of the companies had slowed down, I remember that fall, I think in September, October, I maybe got a couple more emails from other publishers that were interested. And I'm like, okay, well, that ship sailed. And, you have to go with your gut and you just don't look back, you make your decision and you plow forward. So I spent, the pandemic writing the book. So it kept me busy in a very positive way.
I love that. Yeah. So when you're pitching, and yes, there's some resilience, that I think that's a quality that I see in all writers, really, is resilience. And it's the continuation of writing, but it's also, not everyone's going to resonate with your story or with your book. And, it's just, sometimes that can be hard. Sometimes that can be frustrating to hear, no, we're not interested, or no, that's not the thing, or I'm not feeling that one in particular. So, but what was it like to pitch? And in the sense that, do you have any tips or suggestions for crafting a pitch?
Well, with the nonfiction, you need to put together a 20-page book proposal. And this took months. And I read books about it. I took webinars about this process. It was really fabulous looking back, because it really wrote my marketing plan all the way back then. I had done the research on comparable books, the publications and conferences I would want to attend, and now some of them are coming to fruition. So doing all that research and putting that, together before you dive into writing the book really was a beneficial exercise. And it's completely opposite than the fiction world. I now, I hear about novelists and how they spend years writing up that they have no idea what kind of feedback they're going to get. So I like the idea of getting that yes or no before I spent a year writing a book. I did like that. And because it was the first book, I also felt this need to work with a professional, work with a publisher. So I really kind of plowed away until I was able to find that match. I probably ultimately would have self-published, because I think I just had this, desire to get this information out in the world. But I really knew I needed that guidance the first time around too.
I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that space, because, and even with the first book or even with the next book, it's really about what's right for that book in that space. So you can decide you're going to pitch, or you want to be working with a publisher for one book, but then maybe another book, self-publish, is the path that you choose. And maybe the third book, you might say, you know what, I think I'll self-publish that too. But the fourth book, you might say, I really want to pitch this one. And that's okay, because it's really about honoring what that book needs. And I think that that's totally cool, what you were just describing, that, thinking through the different paths. That's with the pitching itself. Did you find that when you pitched the first time and maybe you got feedback that said, not so much, did you go back and refine it? Or did you just say, this is a no for this one, I'll just try again? When did you gauge when you might need to tweak the proposal or query letter versus it just was a no because it wasn't the right fit?
Yeah, the biggest no I got, and it was really from the agents that said, you don't have 100,000 plus people on your platform. That was really, and I knew realistically that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to be viral on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok overnight. Like, I just knew that wasn't in me as well. That's not my thing. I never had to really go back and tweak the actual proposal. I was surprised, because my book is a environmental book. So of course I went after originally the folks that specifically focus on environmental books and parenting, and maybe some of the other comparable books had been published by. And when I got a no from them, I think that was the most disappointing, because I just assumed, this seems like it fits. But there were so many factors going on with COVID. I mean, one of the publishers that I was interested in that had come back to me later, and they seemed interested, they had shut down for like several months. So in the end, I said, well, maybe that's not a good sign. It's probably better that I went with someone who didn't have to shut down during the pandemic. So, there were so many factors at play, but I just kept, moving forward with that same proposal, and it just worked out.
Oh, good. Okay. That's cool, because sometimes, to your point, so you got some initial feedback that helped you to decide, okay, I know what I had. I didn't have this information before. Now I have new information to work with, and help me to make decisions that are best for me and for this book. And that really so that initial conversation with the agents did give you some feedback to kind of work through. And I'm glad, thank you for sharing that, because that is difficult. Like when you are pitching, my co-author and we pitched for a bit, and there were times that we would get no. And honestly, I would think Queen's song, Another One Bites the Dust, would be in my head, because I'm like, that's okay. And so my email to him, if I got the letter first, was dun, 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 what? And so, because it was just the resilience, the ability to say, hey, you fall forward, you learn, you pick up, and you keep moving. And so I love that you talk about it from that standpoint too, that you can hear that you said, okay, I got some good information. And when you got feedback that was clear enough, then you could say, do I resonate with what this feedback is helping me to do? Or is it just saying, thank you, but this does tell me this wasn't the right fit. I'll just look I'll continue looking with what I currently have. So
Mm-hmm.
something you mentioned is that with the proposal, because
Mm-hmm.
it does require you to think about the big picture and the vision for the book itself, it does want the big piece of it is the marketing plan. And so would you talk a bit about your marketing plan, or what that looked like for you, developing it and now actually putting it into execution?
Yes. So I want to first start by saying that I'm an INFJ, I'm an introvert, like many authors. And my biggest fear of being an author and writing a book was this vision of having to be interviewed on television. I absolutely, from the very beginning, said, I will not. I don't care if the Today Show calls, I'm not going, right? So we'll see if we play this recording in 20 years, if I ever get on the Today Show. But so, that part intimidated me. But I knew, my media plan, a lot of it is pitching articles. I also have been writing for regional parenting magazines for several years. So I built relationships with those editors. So I have been, I pitched them, and several of these magazines this month and April and May will be coming out with something involving my book. So that was a great tactic I used. And the biggest thing, and this is most shocking for me, has been that I've been enjoying these podcast interviews. I've been become addicted to applying to podcasts. And so that has been surprising, but beneficial. And I enjoy doing it from home, so it was well. And it gives me that chance to practice and hone in on my speaking skills. But I say I'm the writer first and foremost. The speaking, a little bit more challenging for me, but I'm getting better. But yeah, so the marketing, just really looking at all the audiences to connect with. And I just outlined, all kinds of different kinds of moms, the yoga moms, the nature moms. And so I just have this huge spreadsheet with to-dos. And, if I don't get to it in 1 month, I shift it to another month. And I just, keep plowing away. I feel like I'll be marketing the book for at least that first year after it comes out, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is that when you're excited about what you've created, it's so easy to talk about it, because what you're doing, you're sharing something you are excited about. You're sharing a love that you are excited about. And that is infectious. And it's something that draws people in. And it's like, yeah, I want to learn about that, or I think that would be cool, because you're excited about it. So I think that that's really something that makes it easier when you think about wanting to put yourself out there and talk about your book, because you're excited about your book. So that when you have that enthusiasm and it continues on, you'll be able to market it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is after that, because you still love what you created. So let me ask you this. So in your marketing plan, obviously, it sounds like podcasts were a big part of it in the proposal itself. Well, what other kind of things did you think about that perhaps you included? And maybe now that you're in the mode of execution, you're like, you know what? I don't know that that's really a good fit anymore, or even right now. Are you giving yourself permission to say, it's okay if I don't do that, or if I change course, despite what I thought I was going to do? Or are you what are you trying to do with that?
Well, I have the perfect answer to this. So I had a list, and I actually was just reviewing this last night. I had a whole list of conferences to attend, and I have a giant spreadsheet, and I'm tracking these conferences. I signed up for all their email lists, so I'm seeing their proposed proposal requests. And I actually just gave my first in-person giant presentation, like over 70 people at a big camp conference. And what I just don't know that I'm going to sign up for that again as often, right? I'm giving myself permission to say, you know what, I'm going to stick to the virtual events. And there's a lot of reasons. It costs a lot of money. It's a lot of time. It was so much stress. You're preparing a presentation, and it's not just the words. There's so much you have to worry about when you're in person, what you're wearing, and you're feeling well, on and on and on. And so I had this list of these conferences, and to be honest with you, I had, it was easier thinking during the pandemic if things were online. right? Like I could be doing all kinds of presentations from right here. So now that things have opened up a bit, I am reevaluating. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Am I really, the amount of books I'm going to sell does not compare to it if they're charging me to attend. So I kind of was like saying to myself, and I've heard other authors learn this as well, that it's different if they invite me and they kind of pay, at least my travel costs or hotel, whatever. It's a different thing if I'm spending hundreds of dollars to go and not even know how many people would be in the audience and if I can sell books. So that's something that I am going to evaluate a little bit more closely. Yeah.
Well, and something that I think that's appropriate. And I think that's appropriate even if there wasn't a pandemic going on, just because you've had an event somewhere and you needed to have that event for whatever that reason was. It worked out. It gave you the experience. It gave you the exposure. It gave you great learning. And then part of that learning is saying, great, how do I feel after that? Great. Is this something I want to do again? Or was it one of those things where this was I'm glad I did this, but maybe not in this way. So, I mean, to share, one of the book signings I did way earlier on in my, when I first released my first picture book. So out of the 7 that there are, this happened on the first book. And I had some book signings where it felt amazing and there was so many sales going on and it was wonderful. And then I had one event that I had no sales. And I even had somebody ask me like, hey, did anything ever happen? And I, like literally sitting there at the table waiting, and the shop owner asked him like, it's okay. I appreciate the opportunity, because that told me, okay, now look, let's reevaluate. Was this a location thing? Was it a day timing thing? Did I just pick a wrong time frame for this opportunity? Or was it something where maybe it just, for whatever reason, I thought it was a good idea and I'm glad I got to go. But what also came away was saying, maybe not this one, or maybe look at it at another time for a whole nother day and time. But what did happen was a lady who saw me, we had a lovely conversation, and then she sent me a card, a really lovely handmade card, because we had a lovely conversation. That worked, because that in and of itself was a blessing. So to your point about evaluating, every experience that you're having with your book is an opportunity to reevaluate and to evaluate and say, I want more of this, or let me try something different. So I'm glad that you said that. And speaking of being an INFJ, do you have any tips to help when you are presenting? So whether it is in person or a book signing in person or a virtual event, there's still an element of, there's still preparation. There's still being mentally and energetically spaced, like saying, I can do this, I can bring it. So, but then in the same breath, there's also the, I need some downtime as an introvert. So do you have some suggestions so that if a writer is also feeling that, ooh, do I have the energy? Do I have the ability to do this? Do you have some tips that might help them?
I do. And, I am about 5 weeks out from my pub date for my book launch. And I just last night was feeling the stress and overwhelm and realizing that you can't, you don't necessarily have to fit everything in a given time. I mean, there are certain things now that have to happen before that date, but everything else now, I think it's a wise decision to push off, until afterwards. But one of my rules all along has been to not schedule too much in one day. I know myself, between my stress and anxiety and between my introvertedness, like after this interview, I will need to go for a walk. I'll need to unwind. After the conference, I literally, like, my husband picked me up. I went home, I ate, because of course I hadn't eaten all day, right? I ate and then I crashed. I had like a 2-hour nap, in the afternoon. So making those plans, if you can, to have that time to yourself, to step away, and to, you're in control of your schedule, hopefully that you can be in control of it. Luckily I am. And I'm also balancing, my family, my kids. So yeah, try to keep everything balanced, because that's what, it's all about.
Absolutely. Sandi, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Where can people connect with you and where can they get your books?
Yes, they can find everything over at ecohappinessproject.com. They can learn about my children's book, the parenting book. I have tons of free information with my blog posts, other podcast interviews, articles I've written. And I also have some freebies. I have a Eco Happiness Challenge calendar and a quiz that parents can take. And then they'll get a whole list of nature activities that they can do with their kids. So, I'm really here to offer that information to people and to be available to them and help them, feel happier and calmer by connecting with nature. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm also on social media at GET, G-E-T, Eco Happiness.
Awesome. Sandi, this has been a joy. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.